War never begins with the first shot. It begins with waiting, with the breath you take before sound becomes history. A single lantern swung above a stone table. Its chain creaked with each vibration from the earth above. Dust fell like gray snow. The air smelled of smoke, sweat, and antiseptic, the perfume of what used to be order. Dr. Karl Weber pressed both hands on the table. "Push," he said quietly, "just once more." The woman beneath his hands could not answer. Her lips moved, but no sound came. The air left her chest in a whisper too soft to carry. Her name was Anna Muller, a nurse, barely 26. Tonight, she was the one on the table. Her eyes stayed open, fixed on the swinging light. Every shadow passed across her pupils like a different memory. Outside, bombs rolled like thunder. Inside, a cry broke free, high, fragile, and unmistakably alive. For a heartbeat, even the war paused to listen. Weber lifted the newborn, trembling, covered in blood and ash. He whispered, "Breathe." The child obeyed. Anna turned her head, her face pale under soot. Her lips shaped something soundless. Weber leaned close. "It's a girl," he said. Anna's eyes flickered with something between joy and terror. She tried to lift her hand but couldn't. Weber wrapped the child in a torn blanket. The baby's eyes opened. Gray, sharp, aware. Eyes that looked too old. He had seen those eyes before, in the face of Colonel Reinhardt. Weber froze, then whispered into the dim air, "Dear God, what have we done?" The lantern swayed once more, as if answering. Winter, 1943. Eastern Front. A school had been turned into a hospital. The chalkboard still carried faint equations beneath layers of soot. On the floor, cots stretched wall to wall. Each bed carried a body, and each body carried a story no one had time to finish. Weber walked the corridor. His boots echoed like heartbeats against the broken tiles. He had worked 30 hours without rest, and the day had only begun. Smoke drifted in through shattered windows. Every sound, every breath, every scream, mixed with the faraway percussion of artillery. A woman hummed near the surgical tent. Her tune was soft, almost tuneless. It was Anna. She moved between patients like a ghost with purpose, her white apron already stained with red. She never spoke. They called her the silent nurse. Some said she had been born mute. Others said she lost her voice when a bomb took her family. No one asked which version was true. In war, stories are easier to carry than facts. She worked tirelessly when others collapsed. She stood. When morphine ran out, she held hands. When men died, she closed their eyes and wrote their names on strips of cloth. That was her ritual, writing for the voiceless, though she had no voice of her own. Morning came without sunlight. The sky was a pale bruise. Weber began his rounds with Marta, his assistant. They moved from bed to bed, listening for breath. "Number 11 won't last the hour," Marta murmured. Weber nodded. "Then stay with him." A soldier nearby stirred. His face was gray, his right leg gone. "Doctor," he whispered, "am I going home?" Weber didn't answer right away. "Yes," he said finally, "just not yet." Anna entered quietly, carrying a tray of instruments. The clink of metal sounded like the tolling of bells. Weber glanced at her hands, trembling from cold, not fear. "You should eat," he said. She shook her head. He sighed. "Then at least rest." She wrote quickly on a small card. "Rest comes after peace." He didn't argue. There were too many kinds of fatigue in that room. At midday, the supply truck arrived. Its engine coughed. Its tires sank into the snow. "Two at a time," Weber shouted. Men carried stretchers through the door, bodies covered with frost, faces carved from pain. Anna was already moving, her scarf wrapped tight around her throat. She steadied a stretcher as it tilted. A man on it screamed. She pressed his chest, whispering soundlessly. Her silence calmed him more than any words could. Weber watched, remembering how many people had been saved simply by her presence. When the last stretcher passed, he saw her eyes flick upward. The command car had arrived. The command car came to a stop in front of the hospital gates. Its doors opened with a hiss of frost and authority. Colonel Reinhardt stepped out, his coat lined with medals that caught the weak light like false stars. He was tall, precise, the kind of man who never doubted his own reflection. He surveyed the courtyard as though inspecting the ruins of a dream that had disappointed him. Two soldiers followed close behind, carrying papers, not weapons. Power rarely needs to shout. Weber met him halfway. "Colonel," he said, "we weren't expecting a visit." Reinhardt smiled faintly. "War doesn't wait for invitations." He looked around. "You're doing admirable work here, Doctor." "Efficient, given the conditions. We survive," Weber said simply. Reinhardt's gaze drifted toward Anna, who was helping unload the wounded. Her scarf had slipped. Her hair clung to her face with sweat and snow. For a moment, his expression changed. Something between memory and hunger. "Who is she?" he asked. Weber hesitated. "Nurse Miller." "She doesn't speak?" "No, sir." Lost her voice years ago, Reinhardt nodded slowly, as though tasting the information. "A tragedy. Yet some tragedies make people useful." He turned back to Weber. "Keep her in my reports. I may have work for her later." Before Weber could ask what kind of work, the colonel walked away. That night, Weber found Anna washing instruments in silence. The lamplight made her eyes seem older than they should have been. He said softly, "The colonel noticed you today." She froze. The scalpel in her hand clattered into the basin. Weber saw fear flicker across her face. Not surprise, but recognition. He stepped closer. "Do you know him?" She shook her head too quickly. He waited, but she returned to her work, scrubbing the same tray over and over until her knuckles turned white. Weber didn't press further. He simply said, "Be careful." He's not a man who forgets. Life in the hospital moved on, as if routine could outshout dread. The days blurred, dressings changed, bodies moved, snow replaced by mud, mud by blood. The rhythm of survival was the only music left. When a patient died, they buried him behind the old schoolyard. A nurse read a single line from a prayer book. Then silence. No one had energy for grief. On one of those mornings, Anna stood beside the open grave. Her breath came out in white clouds. She held a strip of cloth with the dead soldier's name written neatly in ink. She tied it to a wooden cross and stepped back. Weber joined her. "You do this for everyone?" She nodded. He looked at the cross. "You could save your ink." She shook her head and wrote, "Names are proof." He frowned. "Proof of what?" She erased, then wrote again, "That they were here." Weber looked away before the cold could settle in his chest. One night, they held a small service in the mess hall. Someone found a bottle of brandy and declared it Christmas, though the date was wrong. The nurses strung up a few bandages like garlands. A soldier played an accordion, missing 3 keys. The laughter that followed was strange, brittle, as if borrowed from another lifetime. Still, it was human, and that was enough. Weber watched as Anna sat near the stove, watching the others. Her hands were clasped around a cup of coffee gone cold. A young orderly offered her a button, gold, polished from his coat. "For luck," he said. She smiled faintly and wrote on her slate, "Something that still shines." Weber saw that smile and for a heartbeat forgot the sound of gunfire. Later that night, the hall was empty except for the smell of smoke and laughter left behind. Weber found Anna cleaning again. He said, "You should rest." She wrote, "Someone has to clean what joy leaves behind." He chuckled quietly. "That's poetic." She wrote again, "Not poetry. Truth." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, relentless, the sound of forgetting. Inside, they worked until the candlelight turned their shadows into ghosts. The next morning, Weber awoke to find Reinhardt already in the ward. He was speaking to one of the nurses, his voice calm, his tone too familiar. When he noticed Weber, he smiled. "Doctor," he said, "these young women are impressive. Loyal, obedient, graceful." "You train them well," Weber replied carefully. "They train themselves, Colonel." Reinhardt walked toward Anna's bed, where she was checking on a patient. He leaned close, so close that his shadow fell across her hands. She stiffened but didn't move. He said something too low for Weber to hear, then turned away. Weber clenched his fists. "She's under my care." Reinhardt raised an eyebrow. "So protective." "Be careful, doctor. Attachment blurs." Judgment. Weber's voice hardened. "And power blurs morality." Reinhardt smiled without humor. "You should be careful what sermons you preach in wartime." He left, and the silence that followed felt heavier than artillery. Anna continued working, her movements mechanical, precise. But Weber noticed her hand shaking when she reached for the next bandage. He realized then that fear had a pattern. It always looked like obedience. That evening, Weber found her alone again, this time sitting in the chapel. The candles were unlit, the air colder than outside. She held a small book in her hands, a hymnal with missing pages. He sat beside her. "Do you come here to pray?" She shook her head and wrote, "To listen." "To what?" he asked. She looked up at the cracked ceiling, then back at him and wrote, "To the silence after people stop believing." He didn't know what to say. He only whispered, "Does it answer?" She smiled sadly. "Sometimes." Outside, the night stretched thin and merciless. Snow fell again, blanketing graves, footprints, and sins alike. In the distance, the guns kept breathing, steady, rhythmic, like a god too tired to rest. Inside the chapel, Anna closed the hymnal and rested her hand on her stomach, almost without noticing. Her fingers trembled. Weber watched, but said nothing. The war slowed for a few days. Not because it had grown tired, but because snow had buried its appetite. The cannons slept, the sky sulked, and for the first time in months, silence returned. Inside the hospital, silence felt like a stranger everyone wanted to trust, but no one dared to. The nurses worked quietly, afraid to speak too loud in case the world remembered how to scream. Anna moved through the ward with a lantern, her steps steady, her face pale under the flickering light. She had become part of the rhythm here, as essential and unnoticed as breathing. Marta watched her and whispered to Weber, "She never stops." Weber replied, "Neither does the war." Marta frowned. Maybe that's why she'll survive it. Weber wasn't sure if that was hope or a curse. Days passed without event, and in war, that was the closest anyone came to peace. The nurses patched wounds, rationed supplies, and pretended the walls weren't cracking above them. One morning a boy from the trenches was brought in, no older than 17. His face was untouched, almost angelic, but his eyes were gone. Anna tended to him without flinching. She wiped his forehead, fed him water, and when he asked what time it was, she traced numbers on his palm. When he died that night, she closed his hands together and whispered something soundless against his skin. Weber watched from across the room. He couldn't hear her, but somehow he understood. It wasn't prayer. It was farewell. That evening, Weber found Anna by the window. Outside, the snow was falling thick, each flake carrying light from the lanterns. He stood beside her and said, "You should rest," she wrote. "I slept once. It didn't help." He smiled faintly. "Then dream while awake." She didn't answer. Her gaze stayed fixed on the horizon where the night swallowed the last traces of light. After a long silence, she wrote again, "Do you ever dream, doctor?" Weber hesitated. "Only of things I can't fix." Anna nodded. Then, with trembling hands, she wrote a single word. "Before." "Before what?" Weber asked. She erased it and wrote, "Before the noise." Her eyes glistened in the dim light. Weber saw a memory there, not an image, but a wound. He said gently, "Tell me." She hesitated, then picked up her slate again. The chalk moved slowly, painfully. "When I was a child, my father drank. My mother prayed. One night he came home angry at both." The chalk snapped in her hand. She stopped writing. Weber waited, but she didn't continue. Instead, she wiped the slate clean and wrote, "The noise began that night. It never stopped. Only I did." She set the slate down and walked away. The lantern light followed her until she disappeared into the corridor. Weber stood alone, the air thick with things better left unsaid. The next morning he visited the cemetery behind the schoolhouse. The wooden crosses stood in rows like unfinished sentences. Anna was already there, her hair dusted with snow. She was placing small stones at the base of each cross. Weber approached. "You come here every day?" She nodded, wrote, "Someone has to remember." "Remembering is heavy work," he said. She wrote again, "For the dead it's light." Weber sighed. "And for the living?" She didn't answer. She only pressed her hand to her throat, a gesture that said everything words couldn't. That night, Weber couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, listening to the wind clawing at the windows. He opened his journal and began to write. The silence is growing. It's not peace, it's waiting. The kind of waiting that makes you wonder if sound itself has lost faith in us. I see her move through the ward like a memory that refuses to fade. She gives comfort without promise. Maybe that's the only kind that works anymore. He paused, staring at the page. Then he added, "The colonel watches her. Too closely. The way a wolf studies the door to a pen. I don't yet know why, but she does, and that is the part that frightens me." He closed the book and blew out the candle. The next day, Reinhardt returned. His boots left sharp marks in the snow, each step deliberate. He didn't come to inspect, he came to watch. He entered the ward, his presence bending the air around him. Anna froze when she saw him. She pretended to adjust a bandage, but her hands trembled. Reinhardt smiled. "Ah, our miracle nurse." He looked at Weber. "You've done well keeping her alive." "She's quite the example of discipline." Weber's voice stayed calm. "She's an example of compassion, Colonel." Something rarer these days. Reinhardt's smile didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "Careful, Doctor. Compassion can look a lot like rebellion." He turned to Anna. "You've been writing names of the dead, haven't you?" She nodded. He stepped closer. "Show me." She hesitated, then handed him one of the cloth tags. He read it aloud. "Private Emil Hahn, 17. Cause of death, infection." He looked at her. "Why record them?" "They're gone," she wrote, "so they won't disappear twice." Reinhardt studied the cloth, then tucked it into his pocket. "Perhaps you should stop." Anna's lips parted, as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came, only the tremor of breath. Reinhardt turned to leave. "You do. Fine work, nurse. Remember, silence is loyalty." When he was gone, Anna sank onto the nearest chair. Her hands covered her face. Weber went to her side, but she waved him off. Instead, she wrote, "He remembers me." Weber frowned. "From before?" She nodded. "Who is he?" She didn't write an answer. She only erased the words and replaced them with one. "Father." The chalk broke again. This time she didn't bother picking up the pieces. The snow fell heavier that evening, wrapping the hospital in a muffled quiet that felt almost merciful. Inside, the lamps burned low, their light bending like tired prayers. Someone whispered that a soldier had died during the night. No one reacted. Death had become a colleague everyone respected and ignored. By dawn, they dug another grave behind the schoolhouse. The soil was frozen, the shovels dull. Weber and 3 orderlies worked in silence while Anna stood nearby, holding a lantern. When the body was lowered, she stepped forward, tied a strip of cloth to the wooden cross, and whispered a name the wind immediately stole. Marta crossed herself. "You act like they can still hear you." Anna smiled faintly and wrote, "Maybe they can." Weber looked at her, that fragile calm, that stubborn kindness, and wondered how something so breakable had survived this long. That evening, they held another small ceremony inside the ward. The nurses gathered the patients who could sit, lit a few candles, and sang a song none of them fully remembered. Someone called it Christmas again. No one cared about the date. Marta passed around a pot of thin soup. Elise handed out scraps of bread wrapped in gauze to make them look like gifts. Even the wounded smiled, weak but sincere. Weber stood by the door watching. For the first time in months, the sound of laughter replaced the sound of shells. It didn't last, but it was enough to remind them what living used to feel like. Anna sat near the stove, her eyes reflecting the small fire. She held the same button the young soldier had given her, turning it between her fingers like a coin of hope. When Weber approached, she held it out. "Keep it," she wrote, "for luck." He smiled. "I don't believe in luck," she wrote. "Then believe in moments." He nodded, pocketed the button, and for a heartbeat forgot to be weary. After midnight, when everyone slept, Weber walked through the corridor. The snow outside glowed under moonlight, and the walls creaked with memories. He found Anna in the supply room, sitting on the floor beside an oil lamp. She was writing in a small notebook, the same one he had seen her hide before. He hesitated at the door. "Couldn't sleep?" She shook her head, then wrote, "The world is louder when it's quiet." He sat beside her. "I know." For a long time they said nothing. Only the sound of the lamp filled the room, a slow hiss of life refusing to end. Finally he asked, "Why do you write so much?" She hesitated, then wrote, "Because silence forgets too quickly." He studied her handwriting, small, neat, deliberate, as though each word was a confession weighed against eternity. She wrote again, "Do you ever think the world is being punished?" Weber exhaled. "If it is, we're the ones serving the sentence." Anna looked down, her fingers trembling. She tore a page from the notebook, folded it carefully, and pressed it into his hand. "Read it later," she wrote. Weber pocketed it. "What is it?" She shook her head. "Not yet," he nodded. "Then promise me something." She looked up. "If you ever need to leave, don't wait for permission." She smiled sadly and wrote, "No one ever gave me any." The next morning the hospital woke to the sound of engines. A supply convoy had arrived. Men shouted, wheels spun, dogs barked. For a brief moment it almost sounded like life. Weber stood by the gate, signing reports. Reinhardt's car appeared again, black, polished, inevitable. He stepped out, surveying everything like a man checking his reflection in other people's fear. "Doctor," he said, "you look tired." Weber didn't respond. Reinhardt continued, "I'm moving east. Command wants progress. Discipline. You'll keep things running here." Weber nodded, saying nothing. Reinhardt's gaze moved to Anna, who was carrying bandages across the yard. "Still here," he said. "Good." Weber clenched his jaw. "She's vital." Reinhardt smiled. "To whom?" Without waiting for an answer, he stepped into his car and was gone. The silence he left behind was worse than the noise. Later that day, Weber returned to his office. He opened the folded page Anna had given him. There were only a few words, written shakily but clear. "If I disappear, tell them I tried to help." He sat for a long time, the paper trembling in his hand. Outside, snow began to fall again, slow, steady, like ash from a fire that refused to die. He whispered to the empty room, "Where will you go, Anna?" But the only answer came from the wind pressing against the window, a voice older than mercy, repeating what the world already knew, that silence keeps its own secrets. The first rumor arrived like frost, invisible until it was too late to stop. Someone whispered it near the stove between two sips of thin coffee. Someone else carried it down the corridor, folded inside a breath. By the time the morning bell rang, the entire hospital knew. The silent nurse was pregnant. Dr. Karl Weber heard it from Marta, who said it as if the walls might report her. "I don't believe them," she added quickly, "but they're saying 6 months." "Maybe 7, Weber didn't answer. He kept writing, but his pen had stopped moving. When he finally looked up, his eyes had the hollow focus of someone watching the past walk back into the room. He asked only, "Who started it?" Marta shook her head. "Everyone, it seems." And no one. Weber pushed away from the desk and crossed to the window. Frost rimmed the glass, blurring the shapes outside. Through the haze he saw Anna, clearing snow from the path. Her scarf had slipped, and the cold bit at her cheeks. Each breath she took became a ghost that followed her until it vanished. The rumor followed too, slower, heavier, harder to shake. By evening the whisper had grown into something sharper. Words like spy, traitor, and whore were spoken softly enough to deny, loudly enough to wound. The air thickened with judgment. Weber tried to ignore it. He drowned himself in work, in bandages and morphine and the steady rhythm of heartbeats trying not to end. But silence had changed. It no longer felt peaceful. It felt accused. Anna moved as she always did, quiet, careful, efficient. But now even her silence seemed suspicious. Each time she entered a room, conversations faltered. Every kindness she offered was met with a glance that lingered too long. Weber watched her once from across the ward. She was feeding a soldier soup, one spoon at a time, her movements gentle. When she turned away, he caught the tremor in her hand. She set the bowl down too quickly and left the room. He followed her to the corridor. She leaned against the wall, eyes closed, breathing shallow. He said softly, "You've heard what they're saying." She nodded without opening her eyes. Then she took her slate and wrote, "It will pass." Weber frowned. "And if it doesn't?" She erased the words and wrote again, "Then I will." He stood there, not knowing what to say. When he finally found words, they felt too small. "You don't deserve this." Anna looked up, her expression unreadable, and wrote, "No one deserves a war either." Then she walked away. The rumor spread faster than medicine, more lethal than infection. Each whisper added its own poison. Some said she had been seen, meeting a man at night. Others claimed she had taken confession too often. Someone even suggested she was carrying the child of an enemy officer. By the third day, the whispers had become doctrine. The nurses avoided her eyes. The soldiers stopped accepting her care. Even Marta, who still defended her, spoke in a lower voice, as if protection itself might be punished. Weber's patience frayed. He stormed into the mess hall one afternoon and slammed his hand against the table. "Enough," he said. "You call yourselves healers? You sound more like grave diggers." The room fell silent. No one met his gaze. When he left, the silence followed him like smoke. That night, Weber sat in his office, the lamp flickering. He wrote in his journal, "The world doesn't need gods to judge it. It does the work just fine on its own. They are killing her with words. I can see it. Her shoulders are smaller every day. If she breaks, it won't be the war that did it. It will be us." He stopped, closed the book, and rubbed his eyes. When he looked up, Anna was standing in the doorway. Her face was pale, her eyes red. She held a small note in her hand and placed it on his desk. He unfolded it. It read, "They think I sinned. I didn't, but I carry the weight anyway." He looked at her. "Anna, you don't have to explain anything." She wrote, "They won't believe the truth." "Then believe it for yourself," he said. She stared at him for a long moment, then wrote one more word. "How?" Weber had no answer. He simply said, "You keep living." She smiled faintly, a smile that hurt to see, and walked out. Outside, the wind screamed through the cracks of the old schoolhouse. The snow howled against the glass. Somewhere in the distance, artillery began again. Slow, methodical, almost polite. Each blast shook dust from the ceiling like snowfall. Weber sat alone in the office. The paper in his hand trembled with the draft. He whispered, "You can't kill silence, but you can make it bleed." The next morning the storm outside cleared, but the one inside the hospital deepened. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, measured, deliberate, unmistakable. Colonel Reinhardt had returned. He walked through the ward with hands clasped behind his back, the picture of composure. The nurses stiffened, the soldiers pretended to sleep, and the air itself seemed to tighten around him. He stopped at the far end, near the operating table, and looked around. "Dr. Weber," he said softly, "join me in the hall." Weber followed, his coat half-buttoned, his jaw set. When the door closed, behind them, Reinhardt smiled faintly. "You've been busy. I hear rumors of disobedience." Weber's tone was calm but sharp. "You mean gossip?" "Call it what you like," the colonel replied. "Still, it reaches command." They are concerned. About what? Reinhardt's eyes gleamed. About loyalty. Weber crossed his arms. Loyalty doesn't mean silence, Colonel. Reinhardt's smile widened. On the contrary, silence is the purest form of loyalty. Words are where betrayal begins. He stepped closer. You'll remember that. Weber didn't move. And if I don't? Reinhardt's eyes went cold. Then you'll learn. Later that day, he called a meeting in the officers' quarters. The room smelled of tobacco and old maps. The nurses stood near the door, pretending not to listen. Reinhardt spoke at length about discipline, about maintaining moral purity, about the dangers of sentimentality. Every sentence was a sermon, every pause a warning. Weber kept his arms folded. When Reinhardt finally turned to him, he said, "Doctor, your hospital has too many secrets." "You of all people know what disease secrecy breeds," Weber answered evenly. "It breeds survival." The officers shifted uneasily. Reinhardt's jaw tightened. "This is not a debate." "No," Weber said. "It's a diagnosis." The room went silent. Reinhardt exhaled slowly, then smiled again, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "You always were a philosopher, Doctor. Be careful. Philosophers make poor soldiers." He dismissed the meeting with a wave. "That will be all." That night, the hospital returned to its uneasy rhythm, but whispers grew louder, filling the gaps between heartbeats. Every step Anna took left ripples in the air, of pity, of curiosity, of judgment. She worked through it all, as though moving through water. Weber watched her from his desk, his hands idle. He wanted to protect her, but protection required authority, and authority here belonged to Reinhardt. He found himself writing again in his journal. "She pretends not to hear them, but silence is not deafness, it is endurance. I envy her strength, and I fear what it costs her to keep it." The next morning, Marta came running to his office, clutching a notebook. "Doctor," she whispered, "I found this under her cot." Weber frowned. "Whose?" "Anna's." She handed it to him. The cover was worn, the pages filled with tight, precise handwriting. He hesitated, then opened it. At first, the words were simple. Lists of patients, small notes, fragments of thought. Then the tone changed. He read, "He comes when the lights go out. He says silence is devotion. He says I am chosen. He says love doesn't ask questions." Weber's stomach turned. He turned the page. The entries continued, shorter now, more frantic. "I try to hide in work. He always finds me. Sometimes I dream he dies. I wake up and pray it wasn't just a dream." Every line ended with a single letter. R. Weber closed the notebook. His hands were trembling. He whispered, "Reinhardt." Marta looked at him, horrified. "You don't think—" "I think the truth has been walking these halls dressed as command." He kept the notebook hidden that day. He walked through the wards like a man carrying a live grenade, careful, controlled, waiting for the right moment to act. Reinhardt appeared twice, each time asking polite questions about morale, supplies, and order. Each time, Weber answered in sentences short enough to avoid traps. That night, he sat by his desk, the notebook open in front of him. The candlelight made the ink shimmer like blood. He read one final entry. "I am not afraid of dying. I am afraid of what will be remembered when I do." He closed the book and whispered, "Then I'll remember the truth for you." The next day, the colonel ordered a surprise inspection of all staff quarters. He claimed it was routine, but everyone knew better. Weber watched from his office window as soldiers opened drawers, unrolled bandages, read letters meant for no one else. He saw Anna standing still beside her bed, her hands clasped behind her back, her face unreadable. When the search reached her, Reinhardt himself entered her room. He moved slowly, deliberately, touching everything: her uniform, her coat, her journal. She flinched when he reached for the small silver cross on her desk. "Pretty," he said. "Where did you get it?" She wrote on her slate, "From a patient." Reinhardt smiled. I'm sure you comfort them well." Weber, watching from the hall, felt his blood turn cold. He took a step forward but stopped himself. The guard beside him whispered, "Careful, doctor. That's not a fight you win." He waited until Reinhardt left before entering Anna's room. She was sitting on the bed shaking. Her slate was broken on the floor. Weber knelt beside her. "He won't touch you again." She looked at him, eyes wide, full of fear and something worse, resignation. Then she wrote on a scrap of paper, "He always does." Weber folded the note carefully and slipped it into his pocket. That night he returned the notebook to his desk and locked the drawer. He wrote in his own journal beside it, "If justice exists, it will not wear a uniform." Weber could no longer pretend. The rumor had become something heavier than gossip. It was now policy. Everywhere he went, he felt the air watching him, the sense that his silence, too, was under investigation. He waited until nightfall before going to Reinhardt's office. The door was slightly open. A lamp burned inside, throwing long shadows across maps and reports. Reinhardt sat at his desk, writing calmly, his movements precise. When Weber entered, he didn't look up. "Doctor," he said, "you should knock." "I'm done asking permission," Weber replied. Reinhardt leaned back in his chair. Bold words. "Be careful. Boldness is contagious." Weber stepped forward. "I've seen the notebook." That got his attention. Reinhardt looked up slowly, one eyebrow raised. "Whose?" "You know whose." A small smile curved the colonel's lips. "Ah, so the nurse writes." After all, Weber's voice sharpened. "You call what you've done protection?" Reinhardt closed the notebook in front of him and folded his hands. "Everything I do, doctor, is protection. Of order, of hierarchy, of the necessary illusion that the world still has rules." "Rules," Weber said bitterly. "Is that what you call it?" Reinhardt's tone remained soft. "What would you prefer? Chaos? You think mercy can survive chaos?" Weber took another step forward. "You destroyed her." Reinhardt smiled faintly. "She was already broken long before I met her." "Because of you," Weber said. Reinhardt rose from his chair. His shadow stretched across the desk like a second uniform. "Be careful, doctor. Accusations are a dangerous hobby. They require evidence." Weber reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the folded note Anna had written. "He comes when the lights go out." He placed it on the desk. "There's your evidence." Reinhardt looked down at the paper, then back at him. "That could mean anything." "It means everything." Reinhardt sighed. "You're emotional. That's not like you. Has she infected you with sentiment?" Weber slammed his hand on the desk. "She's human!" Reinhardt didn't flinch. "So am I." "No," Weber said quietly. "You're something that survived losing it." For a long moment, neither spoke. The lamp hummed between them, filling the room with the illusion of calm. Then Reinhardt said, "If you care so much, take her away. But know this, she will never escape what she carries." Weber's eyes narrowed. "You mean the child?" Reinhardt smiled thinly. "So you do know." Weber's throat tightened. "It's yours." The colonel didn't deny it. He poured himself a drink instead. "In war, everything belongs to the victors, doctor." Even forgiveness, Weber felt the blood drain from his face. "You're a monster." Reinhardt raised his glass. "History will decide that." Weber turned to leave. "History forgets faster than it forgives." As he reached the door, Reinhardt's voice followed him. "Remember, doctor, silence is loyalty." Weber didn't look back. "Then I'll be a traitor." The corridor outside felt colder than the night air. Weber's breath came out in clouds. He leaned against the wall, trying to steady himself. The sound of footsteps made him freeze. Anna appeared, her face ghostly pale, her eyes hollow. He said softly, "You shouldn't be here." She wrote, "He called me." Weber felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "When?" "Now." He grabbed her arm. "You're not going." She shook her head and wrote quickly, "He'll send soldiers." "Let him," Weber said. "You're not alone anymore." Her eyes filled with tears she couldn't voice. She reached up and touched his face. A small, desperate gesture of gratitude or farewell, he couldn't tell. Then she wrote, "You can't save both of us." He gripped her hand. "Watch me try." The next day, the hospital felt different. The usual noise of work had turned into an uneasy whisper. Reinhardt walked through the corridors, silent but watched. Everyone knew something had shifted, though no one said what. They saw it in the way Weber's eyes no longer met the colonel's. They felt it in the way Anna avoided both of them. Weber worked mechanically. His hands stitched wounds, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He couldn't stop replaying the conversation, the calmness in Reinhardt's voice, the casual cruelty of his truth. He wrote in his journal, "I can't bring justice to this place, only witness." Maybe that's what God was, the first witness who never intervened. He closed the book, ashamed of how much sense it made. That night, Reinhardt summoned him again. This time, Weber refused. He sent a messenger instead. "Tell the colonel I'm occupied." An hour later, 2 soldiers arrived at his office. "Orders," one said simply. They escorted him to the colonel's quarters. The door was closed, but light bled from beneath it. Reinhardt stood by the window, smoking. "I don't appreciate being ignored." Weber said nothing. The colonel turned. "She's leaving tomorrow. Transfer orders. Command's decision." Weber's jaw clenched. "That's your decision." Reinhardt smiled. "Does it matter?" "She's ill," Weber said. "She won't survive travel. Then she'll die serving." Her country. Weber took a step forward. "You mean serving you?" Reinhardt's voice lowered. "You're forgetting your place." Weber stared at him. "I remember it too well." For a moment neither moved. Then Reinhardt laughed quietly. "You know, Doctor, I used to admire you. You believed in duty. Now you believe in ghosts." Weber said, "No, I believe in what's left after ghosts." Reinhardt flicked ash into the snow outside the window. "Careful, Doctor. Belief is a dangerous luxury." Weber turned to leave. "So is power." Reinhardt didn't stop him this time. "She leaves at dawn," he said. "If you interfere, I'll bury you beside her." Weber didn't answer. He opened the door and stepped into the dark hall. Behind him, the colonel's laughter followed like a wound that refused to close. When Weber reached his quarters, he found Anna waiting. She had a suitcase beside her, half-packed, her coat draped over the chair. He said, "You're not going." She wrote, "I don't have a choice." He shook his head. "There's always a choice." She erased the words, wrote again, "He'll kill you." Weber smiled sadly. "He already has." She looked at him, trembling. "Why?" she wrote. He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "Because someone has to remember you the way you were, not the way he made you." Tears welled in her eyes. She reached for his hand, but before she could write again, the lights flickered, once, twice, and went out. From somewhere beyond the corridor came the sound of boots. Weber whispered, "It's time." The dawn came without color. The sky hung low, a dull gray sheet that pressed down on the world as if to keep it from breathing. Engines murmured outside the hospital, not the comforting growl of supply trucks, but the harsh, disciplined rhythm of command vehicles. Anna stood by the window, already dressed in her coat. Her suitcase waited by her feet, small, frayed, and too light for a journey she didn't choose. Weber entered quietly. "They're here," he said. She nodded, not turning. Her hands moved automatically, tightening the scarf around her neck. It was the same scarf she'd worn since winter began. He noticed the edges were torn, as if she had been pulling at them in her sleep. "You don't have to go," he said. "You could hide in the cellar." Marta would help, Anna wrote on her slate. "He would find me." Weber clenched his fists. "Then I'll find him first." She looked at him, a plea in her eyes. "Don't." She wiped the slate clean, wrote again, "The war needs you alive." He shook his head. "The war needs none of us." A knock came. At the door, firm, official, final. Reinhardt's voice followed. "Nurse Miller, ready yourself." Anna flinched. Weber moved instinctively between her and the door. "Colonel," he said, "she's unfit for travel." The door opened slowly. Reinhardt stepped in, flanked by 2 soldiers. He looked at Weber with quiet amusement. "Doctor, you seem to have mistaken your role. You treat the sick, not command the healthy." "She's not healthy," Weber said. "You know that." Reinhardt's gaze flicked to Anna. "You'll do fine, won't you, my dear?" Anna stared at him, unblinking. Then, very slowly, she shook her head. Reinhardt's smile vanished. "Defiance doesn't suit you." Weber stepped forward. "That's enough." The soldiers tensed. Reinhardt raised a hand to stop them. "Doctor," he said softly, "don't make this ugly." "It already is," Weber replied. Reinhardt studied him for a moment, then sighed. "So disappointing. You had such promise." He turned to the soldiers. "Take her." The men approached. Anna didn't resist. Weber's hands twitched toward his coat, where the pistol waited, but Anna caught his gaze and shook her head once, a silent command. She wrote quickly on her slate, "Please, let me go." He froze. The soldiers led her out. Reinhardt lingered in the doorway, then said quietly, "You should thank me, Doctor. Some women aren't built to survive freedom." Weber's voice was low. "And some men aren't built to deserve it." Reinhardt smiled faintly. "Careful. You're beginning to sound like her." He left, closing the door with surgical precision. Weber stood there long after the sound of engines faded. He opened the drawer of his desk and pulled out the small note Anna had given him days ago. "If I disappear, tell them I tried to help." He whispered, "No one left to tell." That night the hospital felt emptier than usual. The wounded lay quiet, as if the building itself had lost its pulse. Marta approached him in the corridor. "She's gone?" He nodded. "East," they said. Marta swallowed hard. "No one comes back from East." "I know." They stood in silence, surrounded by the faint hum of the generator. Finally Marta asked, "What will you do?" Weber looked down at his hands, hands that healed, that stitched, that trembled now with something not quite rage. "I'll keep my promise." He returned to his office and began writing a letter. Not to command, not to anyone who could read it. It was a confession addressed to no one. "To whomever survives this, we call it duty, but it's only fear in uniform. We call it obedience, but it's silence wearing medals. If you find this, remember her name, Anna Müller. She believed in life even after it stopped believing in her." He stopped, unable to continue. The ink pooled at the edge of the page. He tore the letter in half and fed it to the stove. The flames swallowed it without protest. He whispered, "Not words. Actions." He took the revolver from the drawer, checked the chamber, and slipped it into his coat. Snow fell again that night, thick and relentless. Weber walked through it without a lantern, guided by the faint tire tracks leading east. The wind howled across the plain, scraping against his ears like whispers of the dead. He walked until the road vanished under ice. Somewhere in the distance, faint headlights flickered, then were gone. He shouted her name, but the wind carried it away. His voice broke in the cold. He fell to his knees, the revolver heavy in his hand. He pressed it to the ground, not his head. The earth was frozen, but it still felt alive. He whispered, "Not yet." He stood again and began walking. Behind him the snow covered his footprints one by one, as if the world had already decided to forget. When he returned to the hospital hours later, dawn was bleeding into the horizon. Marta met him at the door, pale and wide-eyed. "Doctor," she said, "you need to see this." She handed him a small parcel, wrapped in cloth, left by a courier from Reinhardt's convoy. Inside was Anna's notebook. On the first page was a note written in the colonel's hand. "For your records, she was faithful to the end." Weber turned the page. Anna's handwriting filled the next line. "He says silence is devotion. I write anyway." The ink trailed off halfway through a sentence, as if interrupted. He closed the notebook and whispered, "So will I." He opened his own journal and began to write again, this time not for medicine, not for reports, not for history, for her. The rumor was true, but not the sin. The child is proof not of shame, but of what cruelty makes of creation. She deserved peace, not pardon. He stopped, staring at the words. Outside, the first rays of sunlight touched the snow. It looked like forgiveness, or maybe just reflection. He whispered, "You're not gone yet." The door creaked open. Marta stood there, holding a small cross. "You'll get yourself killed." Weber smiled faintly. "Then I'll die where she did." Marta's eyes glistened. "Then promise me something." "What?" "Leave a mark. Something they can't erase." He nodded. "I already have." He opened the notebook again and wrote one final line beneath Anna's words. "I write too." The war had entered its hungriest phase. By late winter it no longer cared whom it devoured, soldiers, doctors, or silence itself. The hospital still stood, but barely. The ceilings wept. The walls cracked from frost. The smell of ether mixed with gunpowder and the faint sweetness of cloth that had touched too much blood. And among it all, one question gnawed at Weber's mind. Where had he taken her? For 2 days, Weber traveled under the pretense of delivering medical reports. He visited outposts strung along the road like bad decisions. Each unit shrugged, no convoys, no nurses, no orders from the colonel. On the 3rd morning, a messenger found him at a checkpoint and handed him a sealed note. It bore Reinhardt's insignia and the neat, arrogant handwriting he knew too well. You should have stayed out of it. No signature, no location, just a verdict. Weber folded the note and slid it into his pocket beside the small silver cross Marta had forced on him. He said aloud to no one, "Then I am in it now." The guard on duty stared at him as if sanity were a ration that had run out. That evening he returned to the ruined villa that served as regional headquarters. A piano leaned near the window. Someone had covered it with a sheet as if grief could be draped. Reinhardt stood by the instrument, gloveless, playing a melody too careful to be tender. He did not stop when Weber entered. "Doctor," the colonel said without turning, "you look unwell." "Working too hard again?" Weber said nothing. His hands hung at his sides like verdicts that had not yet learned to speak. "Where is she?" The colonel finished the phrase, closed the keyboard lid gently and turned. "She?" "You will have to be specific. The world is full of women who need saving." "Anna Müller." A pause, small as a blink, then a smile. "Ah." The nurse Weber took a step forward. "Where is she?" Reinhardt poured 2 drinks, offering one as if the conversation were about weather. "Whiskey?" Weber did not reach for the glass. "I don't drink with men who call harm a policy." Reinhardt sipped his own. "Brevity suits you, doctor. She is where she belongs. You don't own people." "Ownership is gratitude stabilized," the colonel said mildly. "The world runs on it." Weber's voice lowered. "You broke her." Reinhardt shrugged, a gesture too graceful for truth. "She was already broken. I only taught her where the cracks were." Weber swallowed the heat in his throat. "You taught her fear. Fear makes order. Ask any nation," he set the glass aside. "You should return to your ward. Heal what can be healed. Leave structure to those who understand it." Weber stared at him, then said quietly, "If you move her again, I will stop you." Reinhardt smiled with genuine delight. "There it is, the confession I wanted." "Not a confession. A promise. Promises are only future disobedience," Reinhardt said. "She leaves at dawn." Weber stepped closer until their shadows fused on the floor. "No." The colonel's eyes chilled. "Doctor, you are forgetting your place." "I remember it too well." For a long moment neither moved. Then Weber turned and left, refusing the door's attempt to close with dignity. He walked until the villa disappeared behind smoke. The road east had become a thread through snow. His feet learned the cost of resolve. Each step finished the sentence the last could not. When at last he could walk no more, he sat on a stone wall and opened his notebook. Some orders create graves faster than bullets. He underlined it twice, closed the book, and headed back toward the hospital with an answer growing heavy in his coat pocket. Marta met him at the rear entrance, eyes raw from fatigue. "You found her?" "Not yet." "She'll be moved at dawn," Marta said. Kruger heard the drivers bragging. Weber nodded. "Then we have until dawn to become someone else." Marta frowned. "Who?" "People who stop asking permission." Night thickened, bringing with it the peculiar quiet that falls before bombardments. Weber moved from ward to ward, saying what needed saying without saying it at all. Elise packed dressings and blankets with the absent grace of habit. Marta filled a crate with what morphine remained, and 3 sterile needles wrapped like secrets. Kruger tuned an engine by ear in the motor shed and muttered prayers to things with bolts. In the small chapel the candle stubs looked like teeth. Weber lit one and set it in a crack of the altar. The light wobbled as if reluctant to live. He whispered to the empty nave, "I don't need a miracle. I need time." He found Anna in the quarantine wing, a bed by the window, snow stacked in the corners of the glass. She was awake, eyes open, staring at a point somewhere his sight could not reach. The suitcase at the foot of the bed looked like obedience carved in canvas. He sat. "At dawn." She nodded once. Her hands lay over her belly, protective without hope. "We won't let it happen," he said. She turned her face toward him. Her lips shaped a word he could not hear. She reached for her slate and wrote with the carefulness of someone writing on ice. "He will kill you. Then I will have died usefully." Her eyes filled but did not spill. She erased and wrote, "Don't become him." Weber closed his hand over the slate gently. "I become you instead." For the first time she smiled without apology. He returned it with the only kind he had left, tired and stubborn. The first shells fell just after midnight. 2 distant thumps, then the pause of a beast learning where to bite. The hospital trembled. Dust sifted from beams like the world admitting age. Sirens wailed, late and unconvincing. Weber looked at the ceiling as if it might offer counsel, then at the door as if it were already a plan. "Now," he said. Marta arrived with the crate. Elise brought blankets and the small tin of coffee they had been saving for liberation. Kruger appeared at the rear steps, grease on his knuckles and a grin he didn't mean. "Engine lives," he said, "for a while." They lifted Anna carefully, blankets tight, breath tighter. The corridor performed its symphony of panic, boots, metal, orders, prayer. The second wave of artillery corrected the first. Plaster broke free. Glass coughed into the hall. They kept moving. At the back gate a guard reached out and then thought better of it. Fear is fluent in gestures. The truck shuddered as they climbed in. Kruger guided it through the orchard with the lights off, speaking to the engine like a man trying to remember a lullaby. Behind them, the hospital exhaled fire. For a moment the windows shone with a beauty no one asked for. The road toward the river was a thread of ice laid over mud. The truck slid, reconsidered, slid again. Trees became bookends to sentences they had not finished. Marta braced herself against the dashboard and counted under her breath. Elise held a tin cup beneath Anna's mouth and whispered every prayer she didn't believe. Headlights grew in the mirror, small at first, then confident. Command cars. 2. No sirens. Secrets rarely advertise. "Hold," Weber said, as if the tires spoke his language. Kruger chose speed because there was nothing else to choose. Bullets stitched the air. Glass learned how to let go. The truck leapt a ditch and decided to remain alive. The second car clipped a stump and learned humility. The first continued with the focus of someone who had never had to apologize. "Culvert ahead," Kruger shouted. Weber nodded. The truck hit it wrong and survived anyway. Something in Weber's shoulder announced that glass has memory. He ignored it. Anna made no sound. Her hands held the child as if instructing it about gravity. They reached a hill where a chapel kept watch over stones with names. The engine's last willingness went out like a candle. Silence arrived, panting. "On foot," Weber said. The chapel door protested, then forgave. Inside, everything was the color of breath. A crucifix tilted as though listening better that way. Wax scars marked where candles had once been brave. They laid Anna on a pew. Marta found blankets. Elise lit a stub spared for visitations. Kruger took the wrench he loved and became a sentinel. Weber knelt. Stay. Her fingers tightened around his wrist and spelled a rhythm that did not need an alphabet. Outside, the snow revised the world. Inside, time changed its gait. The first pain came like a messenger with poor handwriting. Anna nodded at it as if greeting a relative who stayed too long. The second came sooner. The third brought a new country into the room. Breathe, Weber whispered, giving her a pace to inhabit. Marta boiled water because rituals remain when supplies run out. Elise tore cloth and folded future into it. The labor did not ask permission. It simply continued. Between the waves, Anna rested in a place beyond speech. During them, she traveled where fear could not afford the ticket. Weber listened, not as a physician, not as a man, but as someone trying to be present at the invention of sound. Now, he said at last. She obeyed an ancient grammar. The cry that answered was small and sovereign, and immediately in charge of how air behaved. A girl, red with effort, loud with entitlement to live. Weber wrapped her in his coat because coats are not loyal to rank. He placed the bundle against Anna's chest. The baby protested once, and then, assured, agreed to continue. Anna smiled. The whole thing, not the rehearsal. She touched Weber's sleeve with 2 fingers, gratitude, apology, benediction, and then let her hand fall. The next breath refused to come. Rest, Weber said, the word too thin for the room. Marta began to sob the way people do when the bill is fair and still unbearable. Elise sat without meaning to. Kruger looked at the door because some duties require translation. They buried her when the light remembered morning. The ground consented after argument. A strip of white cloth became the smallest flag the world allows. Weber said, "You are free now," and did not know whether he was telling her or himself. He looked at the child. The eyes were closed. The mouth was certain. "We move," he said. Snow still fell when they left the chapel. It came down in slow spirals, graceful and cruel. The child slept against Weber's chest, a small weight that redefined gravity. Every step he took felt like the world asking for proof that mercy still existed. Marta walked beside him, holding the lantern high. Elise followed with what little they could carry, blankets, morphine, faith worn thin as thread. Kruger brought up the rear, the wrench in his hand his only weapon. Behind them, the chapel faded into gray, the cross a dark smudge against the morning. "Where to?" Marta asked. "West," Weber said. "Toward the forest. Reinhardt will come. He already is." They said no more. By noon, the wind rose. Trees bent under the weight of ice, cracking like bones. The group followed a frozen stream, using it as a path. Every now and then, Weber stopped to adjust the cloth wrapped around the baby. The girl barely made a sound, as if even she knew silence was the only safe language left. Elise whispered, "She looks like her." Weber nodded. "She is her." They reached an abandoned farmhouse by dusk. The roof had collapsed on one side, but a single room remained intact. Kruger checked the walls and nodded. "It'll hold a night." They built a small fire from broken furniture. The smoke curled upward, slipping through the gaps in the roof. Outside, wolves howled, not close, but closer than comfort. Weber sat by the fire, the child in his arms. Her tiny hand clutched his finger. He whispered, "You don't know what you've been born into." Marta stirred the pot of melted snow. "No one ever does." Elise leaned against the wall, her voice barely audible. "What will we do with her?" Weber didn't answer. His gaze stayed fixed on the fire. Finally, he said, "We keep her alive." Marta frowned. "And after?" He looked up. "After doesn't exist yet." That night, Marta woke to the sound of distant engines. She sat up quickly, heart pounding. "Doctor," she whispered. Weber was already awake, listening. Kruger peered through a crack in the boards. Headlights. Weber moved fast. Put out the fire. Darkness swallowed them whole. The sound of trucks drew nearer, Gears grinding, men shouting. Then the light swept across the snow, searching, deliberate. A voice barked orders, too far to understand, close enough to fear. Reinhardt's men. Weber whispered, "Down." "Don't move." They lay flat, the baby pressed close to his chest. Her breathing was small and steady. The light passed once, twice, then lingered on the ruined barn. A soldier approached, boots crunching in the snow. He stopped within 10 meters, scanning with his flashlight. Weber could see the beam crawl across the wall, the floor, and stop just short of his shoe. The soldier muttered something, turned, and left. Engines started again. The sound faded slowly until it was replaced by the softer rhythm of snow. Only then did Weber breathe. Marta covered her mouth to keep from sobbing aloud. Kruger whispered, "They're searching east. They'll circle back." Weber nodded. "We move before dawn." They walked again under the dim sky. The moon hung behind clouds, a pale coin waiting for judgment. The forest swallowed them, branches heavy with frost. The child began to stir, whimpering softly. Weber hushed her gently. "Almost there." "Where is there?" Marta asked. Weber pointed ahead. "A river. If we can cross, they'll lose our trail." They moved through the dark until the sound of water reached them, slow, frozen, half alive. The river was narrow but deep, the current hidden beneath a crust of ice. Kruger tested it with his boot. "It'll break." "We don't have a choice," Weber said. He adjusted the blanket around the baby, then stepped onto the ice. It creaked, groaned, then held. Marta followed, holding Elise's hand. Kruger came last, muttering to himself in mechanical prayers. Halfway across, the ice cracked. Weber froze. Marta gasped. A sheet split open behind them, water gurgling up like breath returning to a corpse. Weber shouted, "Move!" They ran. The ice gave way, but not before they reached the other side. Kruger stumbled, caught the edge, and pulled himself up, coughing. Marta helped him, muttering, "We're ghosts now." Weber looked back across the river. Headlights flickered faintly through the trees. The chase hadn't ended. It was only resting. At dawn they reached a ridge overlooking what had once been a village. Smoke rose from chimneys, not the smoke of homes but of outposts. Reinhardt's insignia flew from a makeshift mast. Elise whispered, "They're everywhere." Weber studied the map in his hand. "We go around, south through the valley. It'll take a day." "Then we walk a day," Kruger groaned. "They'll find us by nightfall." Weber turned to him. "Then we make sure nightfall is far enough away." Marta gave him a look. "You sound like him." Weber blinked. "Who?" "Reinhardt." He flinched as if struck. "Then remind me why I'm not." Marta pointed to the baby. "Her." By afternoon the cold grew sharper. The sky threatened snow again. Weber's hands ached, his shoulder burned, but he didn't stop. Every sound in the forest, every branch, every crow, felt like pursuit. They found shelter in an old church at the edge of the valley. It was smaller than the chapel they'd left, its altar cracked, its windows broken, its pews covered in frost. Still, it was 4 walls and a roof. They lit a small fire and huddled around it. The baby slept again, her breath fogging the air above her lips. Elise whispered, "What if she doesn't survive?" Weber looked into the fire. "Then everything dies for nothing." Marta frowned. "You sound like you still believe in meaning." He smiled faintly. "Belief is cheaper than hope." Kruger muttered, "Both get you killed." Weber said, "Then I'll die believing." That night they heard the trucks again. Closer this time, louder. Weber stood, heart pounding. "They've found the trail." Marta whispered, "How?" "Maybe they never lost it." He picked up the child and handed her to Elise. "If we don't make it, you run." "Don't look back." Elise's hands shook. "And you?" "I'll buy time." Kruger cursed softly. "You're not the hero type, Doctor." Weber smiled grimly. "That's what makes it believable." Outside, the night glowed faintly with the light of approaching engines. The sound of orders carried through the cold. Reinhardt's voice was among them, sharp, commanding, intimate. It cut through Weber like recognition. Marta whispered, "He's here." Weber nodded. "Good." The forest was no longer a place. It was a sound. Branches cracking, engines rumbling, the wind grinding through trees like teeth. Every noise came from every direction at once. Weber could no longer tell if they were being hunted or remembered. He moved through the snow, the child pressed to his chest, Marta behind him, Elise at her side, and Kruger bringing up the rear with the wrench he had carried since the hospital. The sky was a bruise above them. In the distance, the dull glow of engines flickered through the trees like the eyes of something patient. "They're close," Marta whispered. Weber nodded. "Keep moving." The baby stirred, whimpered once. Weber hushed her softly. "Almost there," he said, though he no longer knew where there was. They reached a small clearing surrounded by fir trees bowed under the weight of ice. Kruger stopped suddenly, crouching low. "Tracks," he muttered. "Tires. 2 trucks, maybe 3. Marta looked around, fear tightening her voice. "They're circling us." Weber took a breath. "Then we don't run. We disappear." He pointed toward a cluster of fallen trees. "There. We hide there until dark." They crawled under the branches, their bodies pressed close against the frozen ground. The baby slept again, her breath fogging the blanket. Weber stared through a crack in the branches and saw lights moving in the distance. They stopped. Men shouted. Then a voice rose above the rest. Reinhardt's. "We know you're here, Doctor," he called. The tone was almost amused, almost kind. "Bring me the child, and I'll let the others live." Marta's hand found Weber's arm. "He knows." Weber whispered, "He always did." The voice came again, closer this time. "You were never built for rebellion. You're a man of rules, Doctor. Don't die pretending to be otherwise." Weber gritted his teeth. "Keep her quiet," he said to Marta, "and when I move, you run west. Find the river again. Cross it if you can." Marta shook her head. "You won't make it." He smiled faintly. "Neither will he." Weber crawled out from the trees and moved toward the sound of voices. Snow muffled his steps. He reached a ridge overlooking the convoy. 3 trucks, half a dozen soldiers, and Reinhardt standing beside the lead vehicle, hands clasped behind his back like a man at prayer. Weber called down, "Looking for me?" Reinhardt turned, smiling as if they were meeting at a concert. "Ah, Doctor, I was beginning to think you'd come to your senses." Weber raised his pistol. "I did." Reinhardt tilted his head. "Will you shoot me? In the back, perhaps? Like a criminal? Like a father?" The colonel laughed softly. "You're sentimental to the end." He gestured to his men. "Find the child." Before the soldiers could move, a sharp, metallic clang echoed from the forest. Kruger's voice followed, roaring, "Over here!" The soldiers turned toward the sound. A moment later, the forest erupted. Gunfire, shouting, snow exploding into air. Weber fired once, hitting the first man who aimed at Kruger. The second fell before he could reload. Reinhardt shouted orders, his calm gone. Kruger swung his wrench like a club, catching one soldier across the skull before 2 bullets found his chest. He staggered, but didn't fall immediately. He looked back toward Weber, blood bright against the snow, and grinned. "Told you the wrench was good luck?" Then he collapsed. Weber's vision blurred. He fired again, emptying the pistol. The last shot missed Reinhardt by inches. The colonel ducked behind a tree, shouting, "You can't protect her forever." Weber shouted back, "That's long enough." He turned and ran. Marta was already waiting with the baby, Elise beside her. "We heard it," Marta said. "He's coming." Weber nodded. "Kruger's gone." Elise covered her mouth. Marta closed her eyes. "Then we run for both." They moved west through the trees, slipping, stumbling, never stopping. Behind them came the faint echo of Reinhardt's voice, shouting orders like curses. Each word chased them through the snow. By dusk, the wind rose again. The forest howled. Marta stumbled once, nearly falling. Weber caught her. She gasped, "I can't feel my hands." "Keep moving." They reached a ravine. A thin bridge of wood crossed it, old, cracked, but still standing. Weber tested it with his foot. "It'll hold one at a time." "I'll go first," Marta said. She crossed slowly, the baby clutched to her chest. Each step made the wood groan. Halfway across, one plank gave way with a sharp crack. She froze, then steadied herself and kept moving. When she reached the other side, she turned. "Come on!" Weber followed. The bridge swayed under his weight, creaking like an old confession. Snow blinded him for a moment, and when he opened his eyes, he saw movement. Reinhardt stepping out of the trees on the far side. The colonel raised his pistol. "End it, Doctor." "Before I do," Weber aimed back. "You'll have to hit 2 targets." Reinhardt smiled. "I only ever aimed for one." He fired. The bullet tore through Weber's coat, grazing his shoulder. He stumbled, caught the rope railing, and fired back. The shot hit the wood beside Reinhardt, splintering it. The colonel didn't flinch. Weber moved faster. He reached the end of the bridge and shouted, "Run!" Marta hesitated. "What about run?" She turned and disappeared into the trees with the child. Weber turned back just as Reinhardt started across the bridge. The old wood moaned under the weight. Halfway across, Weber fired again, hitting the plank near the colonel's foot. The bridge shuddered. Reinhardt stopped, smiling grimly. "You think I'm afraid of falling?" "No," Weber said. "I think you're afraid of what waits at the bottom." He fired once more. The plank beneath Reinhardt splintered. For a heartbeat, the colonel hung suspended between gravity and pride. Then the bridge gave way. Reinhardt fell into the ravine, his scream swallowed by the wind. The echo lingered longer than it should have. Weber dropped the pistol and sank to his knees. His shoulder throbbed, his breath came ragged, but the forest was silent again. He whispered, "It's over." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't. Wars never end. They just run out of names. He stood, turned, and followed the trail of footprints leading into the trees. Ahead, Marta waited with the baby, her face pale, her eyes hollow but alive. "We made it," she said. Weber nodded. "For now." They walked on until the trees thinned and the faint outline of a monastery appeared against the horizon. Its bell tower leaned, its roof sagged, but it was shelter. Marta whispered, "Is that—" "Yes," Weber said, "a convent." They looked at each other. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. The wind howled across the valley like a wounded thing. The storm had not eased. It had simply grown tired of mercy. Weber and Marta pressed forward, each step a negotiation with exhaustion. The baby slept against Weber's chest, wrapped in layers of cloth and warmth borrowed from his own body. The monastery stood at the far edge of the hill, a collection of stone buildings half buried in snow. Its bell tower leaned, its cross broken at the tip, yet light glowed faintly from within. For the first time in days, the world offered them something that wasn't pursuit. "We're close," Marta whispered. Weber nodded, though his legs were failing him. "Keep moving." When they reached the gate, he struck the heavy door with his fist. "Help," he shouted. "We need help." For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind. Then, slowly, the door opened. A nun stood there, her face lit by candlelight, her eyes wide but unafraid. "God above," she murmured. "You shouldn't be on the road in this storm." Weber nearly collapsed. "The child," he said hoarsely. "She's cold. She needs warmth." The nun's eyes softened. "Come inside." The monastery smelled of wax, damp stone, and quiet faith. Candles burned along the corridor, their flames shivering with every draught. The nun led them to a small room beside the chapel. "You'll be safe here," she said. "I'm Sister Agnes." Marta set down the crate of supplies. Weber unwrapped the child, his hands trembling. The nun took the baby carefully, her voice soft as she said, "A girl." Weber nodded. "Her mother was a nurse." Agnes looked at him, then at the child. "And her mother?" "Gone." Agnes crossed herself. "Then she'll be safe with us." Marta leaned against the wall, exhausted. "You're sure?" Agnes smiled faintly. "In war, certainty is a luxury, but we will do what we can." Hours passed. Marta slept on a bench, her hand still clutching her rosary. Weber sat by the window, staring at the snow that refused to end. His body ached, but it was his mind that would not rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the bridge, the fall, the sound of Reinhardt's voice disappearing into the ravine. He whispered, "It should have been me." Sister Agnes entered quietly, holding the baby. "She's strong," she said, "and calm." "That's rare." Weber nodded. "She doesn't cry. Maybe she knows she doesn't have to." He looked up at her. "You'll keep her safe?" Agnes smiled. "We keep all who arrive." Weber hesitated. "Her name is Anna." Like her mother, Agnes repeated it softly, as if sealing a prayer. "Anna." The baby stirred, eyes fluttering open, gray, sharp, too aware. Weber felt something twist in his chest. He rose, reached out, and touched her tiny hand. "You won't remember this," he said, "but I will." Agnes watched him. "You've lost much. Everything. Then you've survived the hardest part." He gave a tired smile. "You don't know me," she shrugged. "No one needs to. We are what remains of each other." At dawn, Weber stepped outside. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried in silence. The sky was pale, the kind of gray that comes before forgiveness. He walked to the edge of the hill, the wind cutting his face, and looked down into the valley. The river below glittered faintly in the morning light. Somewhere beyond it lay the ruins of everything he'd known. Marta joined him, wrapping her shawl tighter. "She's safe?" He nodded. "For now." Marta stared toward the horizon. "Do you think he's dead?" Weber didn't answer right away. "I think the war has many ways of keeping men alive just to haunt the living." Marta sighed. "And us? We'll keep moving until we stop pretending we know how." She nodded slowly. "Then we stay here for a while." "For a while," Weber agreed. The words felt temporary, fragile, like peace itself. Inside, Sister Agnes laid the baby in a cradle near the altar. The child's breath rose and fell in rhythm with the flicker of the candles. Agnes whispered, "Sleep now, little one. The world outside is still deciding what to become." Weber stood in the doorway, watching. The weight in his chest did not lift, but it began to take shape, a kind of grief that could be carried without breaking. He touched the doorframe, as if leaving something behind. He said softly, "You'll live." For her then, he turned and walked back into the light of morning. The war did not end. It simply ran out of men to feed it. The last cannon spoke somewhere beyond the horizon, and the silence that followed was louder than any victory. People crawled out of ruins like thoughts returning to an unfinished sentence. The air smelled not of smoke anymore, but of absence. Weber walked west until the roads became mud, and mud became memory. The child slept against his chest, wrapped in a blanket that had once been Anna's apron. Each step away from the front felt heavier, not lighter, as if leaving meant taking the ghosts with him. He traveled through villages that were more rumor than place. Some people offered him bread, others offered suspicion. He learned to accept both with the same grace. Once he traded his last syringe for a horse that died 2 days later. Once he slept beside a well and dreamed of Anna humming, the same broken melody, the one that had no composer. When he woke, the wind was singing it for him. "You still keep watch," he whispered. The baby stirred but did not cry. Even then she was quiet, a child of silence, born into it as if it were blood. Weeks later he reached the borderlands. The mountains rose like folded prayers. There, among the snow and scattered churches, he found a convent still standing. The gate was unpainted, the bell cracked, but it rang when he knocked. An elderly nun answered. She looked at him for a long moment, then at the child. "You look lost," she said. "I am," Weber replied. He held out the child. Her mother was a nurse. She died saving others. The nun's eyes softened. "And you?" "I'm just the witness." She nodded slowly. "Then leave her with us. We'll remember the mother in our prayers." "She didn't pray," Weber said. "Then we'll do it for her," the nun replied. He smiled faintly. Her name is Anna. The nun nodded. She'll be safe here. That night, Weber sat in a small room near the chapel and wrote a note, folding it into the blanket. Her name is Anna. Tell her someday that her mother was brave. He placed the child in the cradle and left before dawn. The bell rang once behind him, not for warning, not for welcome, just to mark the leaving. Years passed. The convent's garden grew again. The war became a story told in half-truths and medals. The child grew too, dark hair, gray eyes, a calm that made even grief behave. They called her Anneliese. She learned to read early, though she preferred listening. She said books were better when someone else's voice lived in them. Sometimes she stood by the window for hours, tracing shapes in the frost. When asked, she said, "I'm remembering someone I never met." Sister Agnes, the abbess, loved her like her own, but she sensed the girl carried something older than childhood. One night, Agnes found her awake, listening to the wind. "What do you hear?" the nun asked. "Someone breathing," Anneliese answered, "but I can't tell if it's the world or me." Agnes crossed herself, though she didn't know why. At 16, Anneliese began helping in the infirmary. She changed bandages, fetched water, and sat with the dying when no one else could. "You have steady hands," Agnes told her. The girl smiled. "Maybe they're not mine." Once she found an old trunk in the attic, filled with things left by previous nurses, bandages, letters, a rusted scalpel, and a small notebook, its cover nearly burned away. She opened it. Only one page remained. "Even in silence, I loved you." She traced the letters slowly, as if trying to feel the voice that had written them. When she asked about it, Sister Agnes said, "It belonged to a woman from the war." No name, only a story. What kind of story? One that ended too soon. Anneliese nodded, but that night she dreamed of a woman standing in a field of snow, holding a lantern. The woman turned, and though she had no mouth, she smiled. Meanwhile, in a city rebuilt from ruins, Weber worked in a small clinic by the river. He never remarried. He rarely spoke. He healed the sick, buried the dead, and carried the silence of both. Some nights he walked to the bridge, stared at the water, and thought of the chapel. He imagined the girl growing, learning to walk, to laugh. He hoped she would never learn to fear footsteps behind her. He wrote letters he never sent. In one he wrote, "I see your mother sometimes, in the faces of those who refuse to give up on the living." He folded each note carefully and locked them in a drawer labeled "For After." Years went by. The drawer grew heavy. Winter again, the kind that remembers everything. Weber, now old and thin, received a letter marked with a wax seal. It was from the convent. "Dr. Weber," it read, "Sister Agnes has passed. The girl you left is grown now. She asks about you. If you still live, she wishes to meet." He read the letter twice, then packed a coat and left the next morning. The journey was slow. The roads were familiar and foreign at once, ghosts wearing the clothes of geography. When he reached the hill, snow was falling just as it had the night Anna died. The chapel stood, older but not defeated. The bell rang once as he entered the yard. He walked to the back, to the small grave beneath the tree. The wooden cross was gone. In its place stood a stone. Carved into it were two words, "Mercy survives." He touched the carving with gloved fingers and whispered, "You were right." Behind him, footsteps. A woman's voice, soft, uncertain. "Dr. Weber?" He turned. She was young, no longer a child, but the resemblance was there. The same quiet strength, the same gray eyes that seemed to carry centuries. "Anneliese," he said. She nodded. "I thought." "You might never come. I thought I might not be alive to." She smiled faintly. "Then we're both lucky." They stood in silence, the snow falling between them like punctuation. The snow fell thicker as they stood among the graves. The wind sang through the broken bell tower, low and mournful, a hymn without words. Weber looked at the woman standing before him, not Anna, but everything she had left behind. "Your eyes," he said quietly. "They're hers." Anneliese smiled. That's what Sister Agnes used to say. Weber nodded. She was right. They stood in silence for a moment, both looking at the stone. Mercy survives. The words caught the light of morning like a promise that refused to fade. Finally, Annalisa said, "You knew her, didn't you?" My mother Weber hesitated. The truth felt heavier with time. "Yes." "What was she like?" He smiled faintly. "Like winter sunlight. Quiet, but everything still lived because of her." Annalisa lowered her head. "Did she suffer?" He closed his eyes. "Everyone did. But she bore it differently. She made even pain look sacred." Annalisa's voice trembled. "I used to dream about her. I didn't know what she looked like, but I could feel her. Like someone humming through the walls, Weber's throat tightened. She would like that. She used to hum when she worked." Annalise looked up, eyes wet. "Was she afraid?" He thought for a long time. "Yes, but she never let it rule her. Fear served her, not the other way around." The wind shifted. Snow swept between them. Weber saw Anna's face in the girl's expression, the same quiet defiance, the same mercy even toward the world that hurt her. He said softly, "She wanted you to live. She wrote it once, that even in silence she loved you." Annalisa gasped. "You've read it?" He nodded. It was in her journal. She reached into her coat and pulled out the old half-burned notebook. "This?" Weber's breath caught. "Where did you—" "I found it in the attic," she said. "Sister Agnes said it belonged to a nurse. I didn't know it was hers." Weber took the notebook gently, his hands trembling. The cover was brittle, the pages thin. He opened to the last entry, the one he'd memorized long ago. "Even in silence, I loved you." He whispered the words aloud, his voice breaking. "It's her handwriting." Annalisa nodded. "I copied it sometimes, just to see if my hands would understand." He smiled through tears. "They do." They stood for a long moment, listening to the wind move through the trees like a voice returning home. Later they sat in the small chapel. The candles flickered weakly, struggling against drafts that smelled of old stone and wax. The crucifix above the altar had lost its polish, but not its presence. Annalisa looked at the notebook in her lap. "She wrote about someone," she said. "A man she trusted. Someone who helped her. Was that you?" Weber stared at the floor. "I was there, yes. But I didn't save her." Annalisa shook her head. "She didn't write about being saved. She wrote about being seen." Weber blinked. "Seen?" She nodded. "She said the world made her invisible, but someone saw her anyway. That's what love was to her, being seen without being forgiven." He let the words settle. "Then maybe she saw me too." They both smiled, small, weary smiles that held entire lifetimes between them. The afternoon light dimmed to amber. Weber stood, his body trembling with age. "I should go," he said. Annalisa rose quickly. "Stay. There's room here." He shook his head. "I've spent too long among ghosts. You belong to the living." She stepped closer. "And you? Where will you go?" He looked toward the door. "Where silence still listens." She took his hand. "You don't have to carry her alone anymore." He nodded slowly. "I know." He looked at her once more, memorizing the shape of her kindness, the proof that some things do survive. "You're what she left me," he said. "And that's enough." Annalisa whispered, "She left us both." He smiled, and for the first time in years it reached his eyes. "Then promise me something." "Anything." "When the bell rings, remember her." "Not for what she lost, but for what she gave," Annalisa nodded. "I will." He left the chapel just before evening. The snow had stopped. The sky glowed faintly pink, the color of forgiveness. Weber walked slowly down the path, his cane marking the rhythm of farewell. Annalisa watched him until his figure blurred into the distance. She stood there, the old notebook clutched to her chest. The wind rose again, gentle this time, carrying the scent of candles and cold earth. She whispered, "Even in silence, I loved you." The bell rang once, low, soft, eternal. For a moment it sounded like breathing. History forgot the details. It always does. The records burned, the medals rusted, the names turned to dust. But somewhere, a child survived. Somewhere, mercy did too. And when the bell rang on cold mornings, people said they could still hear a woman humming, soft, broken, eternal. The sound carried across the snow, through the years, into the hearts of those still trying to forgive the world for surviving.